everyone, and welcome to week 12. Today we will be discussing the impact of external factors on nonprofit organizations. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that nonprofits do not function in isolation. So regardless of whether you have the best internal practices, if you are not staying aware of the external environment, then you can be in a lot of trouble if you're a nonprofit organization. There's so much going on around you that you can only do so much internally. So you need to be aware of these external factors. So a lot of nonprofits can use what's called a Prestel Analysis. So this is a really nice tool to assess all of the external forces that you need to be aware of as a nonprofit. So the Prestel really looks at these external trends, what's going on outside of the organization, again, externally, what's going on outside of your nonprofit, that's going to impact you, how you deliver services, your funding, your clients. So it's not just about funding. There's a lot more that can impact a nonprofit outside of funding. So you have to think about how your clients can be affected by something, and just everything that's going on around you. So the first part of a PES, so again, you can kind of see the components. So it's political, economic, social forces, technological forces, legal forces, environmental forces. So I'll go through each one of these separately to kind of identify what's going on within each example. So specifically if we're looking at the political forces, so keep in mind that political forces can be happening on the local, state, national, international level. So we're just really talking about any policies that are going on around you. So any policies on any level can really impact nonprofits. Trade, think about the current trade war we have going on, that can impact prices, can impact salaries, so that might impact your clients. Grants, so a lot of government grants are determined through policy, and that can really impact your nonprofit, whether or not you're going to get this grant. For example, in St. Louis County, they have a children's health care fund for mental health services, and those are kind of determined, it's kind of political how they determine the allocation of those. So you have to really be in with the different parties and aware of the allocation process, and those are allocated through grants, and they have different funding priorities, and priorities can change over time. All of these are tied in politically. Wars, elections, government leadership, so who's in charge, trends in political policies, these can really determine what's happening to your nonprofit. Again, it can determine it through funding. So it might be that the government has different priorities, so they might shift funding away from providing services for children's mental health because they want to provide funding for adult mental health. So you have to be aware of these changes. It might be that they don't have, the government needs to cut back on its spending, so then what's going to get cut in the process? And of course, as government leadership changes, there's certainly going to be changes in funding priorities. So nonprofits need to be able to respond to that. They kind of need to be able to see that coming. For example, a nonprofit that I have worked with previously relied a lot on government grants. They relied a lot on specifically local funding. The local funding stream got cut, and they lost probably a third of their salary, a third of the income. So that really hurt them. They didn't see it coming necessarily. They weren't prepared for it. In that situation, they probably needed to diversify their funding streams. They shouldn't have been as reliant on the government grant, because they essentially had to cut a lot of staff. They had to cut a third of the staff because there was a change in the political environment that they weren't prepared for. So you need to be aware of what's going on around you, so you can respond to that. Economic forces really tie into political forces, because if there's changes in the economy, there's probably going to be changes in how the government responds. So sometimes if the if the economy is tanking, the government doesn't have as much money, so they may need to cut back in areas. But at the same time, sometimes if the economy is not doing well, the government might try to respond by increasing different policy initiatives. So we saw that with the recession. In the recession, think about that period of time when, you know, people had high unemployment rates, so the unemployment rate was going up, so people were losing their jobs, salaries were declining, so the government chose to respond by providing more in unemployment benefits. They provided, general funding to individuals, so everyone got like a check in the mail for $500 to try to rebound the economy. They increased food stamps, so people received more in food stamps. So these political policies were in response to the economic conditions. On the flip side, and the economy is doing well, so the economy currently is doing pretty well. So what we're kind of seeing in response to the economy doing well is we're seeing inflation. Inflation's increasing, so that means the prices of goods are going to go up. So that means if you are working with clients who might be low income, which most social workers are in some way, shape, or form, that's typically the group that we're working with. So these are people who are going to be more affected by rising prices. So if we're seeing, rising prices of necessary household goods, such as the cost of bread, the cost of eggs, food that people have to eat. So we know that food stamps isn't going to cover everything that you need. So if there's rising prices, how is your nonprofit going to respond? If your people, the clients that you serve, can't afford to buy basic goods such as food and clothing, maybe your nonprofit's going to need to increase support to these individuals. Maybe they're going to have food drives. Maybe they're going to open a food pantry. Just being aware of what's going on around them. So again, this might not affect a nonprofit with regards to funding, but they may need to respond by offering different programs depending on the economic conditions. Tax incentives are another component of the economic forces. So I had talked previously about different ways that cities, local governments can incentivize commercial businesses. So there's different ways that you can offer tax incentives to businesses to try to get them into the area. So that would also be an economic factor, and something that different areas would need to be aware of. What tax incentives are in the area. Some nonprofits can take advantage of these tax incentives. Of course, there's always really nice tax benefits for being a nonprofit, and that's something that they need to definitely take to their advantage. The next kind of area would be social factors. So this might consist of different cultural values in the area, demographic shifts. So maybe, currently we have an aging population. So the baby boomers are getting older. That's a demographic shift. We're going to need more support for the aging population. So that might be opening more nursing homes, having more social workers who are really skilled in providing geriatric services. That's a demographic shift that will certainly affect nonprofits. The areas of aging. So there's, each county has like an area on aging who provides a variety of services to older adults. So it's important that, that they're aware of aging populations, because they need to be able to respond, because they might have a sudden increase in the number of people who are receiving their services. So they're going to have an influx. So maybe they need to start hiring more staff. So there's different ways that they're going to need to respond. There's also, public opinion goes into social factors, social attitudes, people's thoughts on different topics. I just read an article earlier today about smoking policies in St. Louis County. So a lot of St. Louis area businesses or St. Louis County people have been trying to push to limit smoking in restaurants and other public areas. So it's certainly a public opinion or social attitude on something that certainly can affect nonprofits. It can affect their clients. If they have clients who typically smoke, that might be something that they have to work with them on, because it's public opinion is kind of changing on that. Health education, people's health behaviors would also fall into the social factors. So people who are kind of choosing to exercise more or not exercise more, that's something that would fall into this realm as well. Technology, there's a lot going on with technology right now. So technology is always changing. So there's a lot of emerging new technologies. Also thinking about aging, unsupported software. Some nonprofits might have some technology that is no longer being supported. So trying to up their technology and get new technology. Nonprofits are always trying to make cuts somewhere. Technology is probably the first to go. They don't always necessarily have the best technology. That can also be like different databases. Most nonprofits have access to some sort of online database where they might store client information, making sure that's up to date and making sure their staff are up to date on using the technology. Sometimes you have staff who might not be the most technologically inclined, so keeping them up to date on how to use the technology, because there's a lot that you can use to keep track of client information, to help clients with treatment, but if the staff aren't aware how to use the services, then it's not going to be super helpful. Internet reliance, so just getting your clients connected to the internet, what's the best ways to connect them to the internet, and of course thinking about technology when we're communicating with our clients. So all of these can affect a nonprofit and will affect a nonprofit. Thinking about different technologies that are available is going to be important. So the next area is the legal category. So sometimes legal and political have some overlap. Laws fall into both categories because laws are certainly within the legal realm, but a lot of times the laws are set on the political side. So keep those laws in mind. That can impact, it can impact your clients. If you're in, working with the criminal justice population, laws are going to be really important. Thinking about what's, the legal consequences for different actions, and you might need to advocate for your clients in certain areas. Court cases can certainly impact your service area. Same-sex marriage laws, if you're working with the LGBT population, that was certainly something that's going to impact your clients. So it's something that you need to be aware of. There's certainly so much going on with immigration right now, which I'll talk about later. So you have to constantly be up to date on what's happening legally to understand how your clients are going to be affected. Environmental, so think about air quality, environmental regulations, but also think about just the availability of different things in the area, whether that be clean water, health food, drugs, availability of drugs. So that's all going to be in the environmental realm. So if you live in an area without access to a lot of grocery stores, that would be considered a food desert. That's something that the nonprofit's going to have to work with if they're working with, again, low-income clients, which most of us are. It's going to be a challenge to try to get your clients access to food. It's something that they're going to have to be aware of. Where's the closest grocery store and how do I get my clients there? So kind of thinking of all these different pestle areas, I'm kind of going to give some examples thinking about a substance abuse agency. So let's consider this make-believe substance abuse agency and how they're going to be affected by the external forces. So if you think about the political environment, consider potential changes in the healthcare laws. Healthcare is always a hot topic, and a lot of times substance abuse services can sometimes be paid for by insurance. So under the Affordable Healthcare Law, substance abuse is considered a mandatory requirement for insurance companies. That's a big deal. If you're a substance abuse agency and you're trying to get paid for your services, you want to be able to bill insurance without having to bill your client. So that's really going to help substance abuse agencies in getting funding. They can get funding from insurance companies. Before, it was on a case-by-case basis. Some insurance companies provided funding, provided repayment for substance abuse treatment. Others did not. So this is a big win for substance abuse agencies in getting this added to the Affordable Health Care Law. Economic forces, again, if you think about the unemployment rate, so substance use is directly linked with the unemployment rate. So people who are using substances tend to have lower employment rates. They tend to live in poor areas that have higher unemployment rates. So it may be, when considering where your substance abuse agency is going to provide treatment, maybe they need to consider these economic forces in where they're going to have their treatment center. Maybe it needs to be housed in a lower income area with a higher unemployment rate. Cost of drugs is also determined through economic forces. So the economy sets prices through supply and demand. I'm not going to get into more than supply and demand. I won't bore you with an economic lecture, but prices are set by supply and demand. So that's going to really set the price of drugs. And which drugs, people tend to use which drugs are the cheapest, and that's going to change. There's, currently we have an opiate epidemic. Part of that's related to prescription medical costs, but part of that is also related to heroin, just the cost of heroin. It can certainly be cheaper than some other drugs. So knowing that different substance abuse agencies have to be able to respond, they have to know which drug is cheaper, which drug are people using more, because they're going to have to change their treatment methods based on which drugs people are addicted to. Social factors really play a lot in substance abuse. So think about social attitudes towards addiction. Different people have different beliefs about addiction. Is it a personal deficit that you're addicted, or is it something related to these outside forces, such as these economic factors and these social factors that cause people to become addicted to drugs? So depending on your social attitudes and the social attitudes of the area where you're working, it might be really hard to get the community on board. If you're living in an area where, using drugs is really a taboo, and when someone overdoses, the family doesn't want to talk about it, and they're unwilling to really recognize that this was due to substance use, it's going to be hard to get your services in the area. There might be taboo against seeking treatment for substance abuse, especially if people think that it's a personal deficit. Then why would you need this help? You should just stop using. You don't really need treatment. So it's a social attitude, and something that the nonprofit is going to have to be aware of. They're going to have to work through these social attitudes that are against receiving substance abuse treatment in order to get, community, not just community funding, but community support as well, because they're really going to need the full support from the community to get these people in treatment. Again, educating the society on what causes substance abuse, again, is going to be part of that. When it comes to technology, think about different emerging technologies for treatment. There's different ways that you can kind of treat people. You don't always have to treat them in a strict substance abuse facility. What about people who are receiving outpatient treatment for substance abuse? How can you use technology to help them? I'm sure there are apps that can help people track their substance use. There's certainly apps that tell people, what's their alcohol limit right now. Can I drive based on how many drinks I've had? That's an emerging technology that can help, and that a substance abuse agency can use, because if they're working with people who are addicted to alcohol, people who are, on probation for having too many DWIs, maybe they need to connect them with this app so they can really make the decision as to whether they're able to drive or not. So there's a lot of emerging technologies to get people connected to treatment in both an inpatient and an outpatient setting. Think about the legal aspect. Substance abuse has huge legal implications. Of course, if you think about there's obviously a big push within social work on decriminalization of marijuana possession. So there's a lot of people who are in jail for marijuana possession. So it's a question of, should it become legalized, should it not become legalized? And that's going to affect, whether people are in jail or not if they are using marijuana. There's again also the different beliefs on whether we should punish people who are addicted to substances or if we should provide them with treatment. So people who are found with possession of different drugs might get a few years in jail. Should we send them to jail with people who are committing other crimes, other more violent crimes, or should people who commit substance-related crimes be sent to treatment? So people have different opinions on punishment for first treatment. This is going to change based on the area where you're living, and it's something that has to be considered as a substance abuse agency. Environmental factors, just think about the availability of drugs. So what drugs are even available in the area? So depending on where you live, if you're in a rural or an urban setting, your clients are probably going to have access to different types of drugs. So that's going to need to be considered when you're thinking about treatment, and the people are going to be coming into your area. Which drugs are they going to need to be treated for? So along with these external factors, there's other players in nonprofits. Specifically, a lot of nonprofits are involved in networks or coalitions. So a lot of nonprofits collaborate with one another. So when we're thinking about networks, so nonprofit networks, this is typically pretty informal. So the purpose of it is for nonprofits to make connections with one another, with other similar groups. They're sharing interests, they're sharing knowledge with one another, helps people feel as that they're part of a team, rather than isolated in their one nonprofit. So I've been involved in a few nonprofits over the years, nonprofit networks, sorry, been involved with a few networks. So networks, a lot of it was resource sharing. So again, we were working with some really at-risk populations where I used to work at, and I sat on several networks with other nonprofits, and we would share resources. So here's what our nonprofit does. We provide these services. Another nonprofit would tell us that they're providing this specific service. We worked with school districts. A lot of school districts might have fairs, health fairs for their clients. So it was important for us to be aware of what all was going on in the community, what other services were available that we could then connect our clients with. I was involved with another network that specifically connected nonprofits who provided different recreational activities for individuals with disabilities. So we were essentially doing very similar things, and the goal of the network was that we weren't doing the exact same thing and that we weren't doing them at the exact same time. So we were trying to more understand when other services were being provided so that we could really have our services at a time that it made sense. As nonprofits, we don't need to compete with one another. Inherently, we're doing different things, whether that be that we're serving different populations, or we have a different structure in place, or that we're serving different areas or at different times. We have to realize that we're not necessarily in competition, so we have to be able to work together and not provide the exact same service at the same time, because then we are in competition. So don't be in competition with your nonprofits. Fight with the other nonprofits. Join a network, figure out when other things are being run. There's also coalitions. So the biggest difference between a network and a coalition is that a network is more informal, more about resource sharing, versus a coalition is much more structured. Coalitions tend to be working with one another to accomplish a goal. Networks are more people getting to know each other, being aware of what services are provided. Coalitions have an emphasis on getting things done. So they're trying to really work together to make group-wide decisions. So there's not necessarily one nonprofit who's in charge of the coalition. Everyone's working alongside another. So coalitions are typically pretty narrowly focused on a very specific relevant issue. So all these nonprofits, for example, I used to be involved on a coalition for children of offenders. So all of these nonprofits cared about the welfare of children, specifically of children of offenders in some way, shape, or form. So whether that be nonprofits who serve children with mental health issues, whether that be nonprofits who specifically served offenders and helping them integrate into society, these nonprofits all had a role in this coalition. They all had some way that they cared about the well-being of children of offenders for some reason, and they had different goals to really further their overall mission of working with children of offenders. So again, it's much more coalitions are much more focused on getting something done. My supervisor is currently on a coalition to help increase access to bikes for children with disabilities, make bike riding more accessible. So there's like 20 nonprofits throughout St. Louis who are on this coalition. That's a lot. It's called Cycle St. Louis is the name of the coalition. So specifically children with disabilities, trying to get them with bikes, because two-wheeled bikes aren't always accessible for kids with disabilities. So there's a variety of organizations who work with different groups of kids with nonprofits. So, Cerebral Palsy Association is on this. Different recreation providers are on the coalition. Rankin Jordan, which is a pediatric hospital in St. Louis, is part of this coalition. So all of these nonprofits work together to help provide and plan events to get kids with disabilities connected with bikes, whether that be fitting them for bikes, finding them accessible bikes, or physically planning bike rides for the kids to come and bike ride together. So there's different events that they're planning together, but the main difference is that if that was just a network, they would just be sharing their resources, saying, oh, this is what my nonprofit does, this is what my nonprofit does, etc. But as a coalition, they have a central mission that they are wrapped around, and they're working together to advance that mission. They're specifically taking steps to advance their goals. So that's the difference between a network versus a coalition. Coalitions are much more structured. So, of course, the question that a lot of nonprofits have is to collaborate or not to collaborate. That is the question. So, is it important that nonprofits should be collaborating? Should they not be collaborating? There's a lot of pros and cons on either side. And that's why a lot of nonprofits, they'll probably be engaged in a few collaborations, but they're not going to be completely overwhelmed and take up all the time to collaborate, because again, there's pros and cons. So some of the pros on collaborating is it allows organizations to respond to complex issues. So if we think about getting kids with disabilities with bikes, there's a lot that goes into that. So there's help from physical therapists to figure out what's accessible for kids. There's help on nonprofits to get the kids connected with other organizations and to get them doing it in groups. So it would be really difficult for one nonprofit to tackle this by themselves, because multiple nonprofits, they each have their own perspective, and they're each bringing staff that have a very specific skill set. So by bringing them together, they can really respond better to the problem. There's also going to be reduced costs when you're choosing to collaborate, rather than one nonprofit kind of fronting all of the bills for this project. They're able to kind of spread the cost across multiple entities, and they might have access to more resources, more staff, more knowledge. It's also helpful for advocacy efforts. So, for example, if a group is trying to work on decriminalizing marijuana possession, my collaboration, my coalition on ex-offenders would be really helpful for that. And rather than just my one little nonprofit advocating for the decriminalization of marijuana, when you have 20 organizations advocating for the exact same thing, it's going to be a lot stronger. There's 20 organizations. They each have their own set of clients, their own set of advocates, of people on the board of directors, of volunteers, people that they can get the information out to, and there's more people who can put pressure on political figures to push this effort. So it really helps for advocacy efforts when it comes to really trying to put pressure on the political people. However, there's certainly cons to collaborating. So that's why nonprofits aren't going to spend 100% of their staff time doing collaborations. It requires a significant amount of time and resources. It's constantly going to meetings sometimes. Sometimes people feel all they do is go to meetings. Is it worth my time to go to this random coalition meeting when I'm not directly advancing my nonprofit's mission, when I could be spending that hour doing something to directly serve my clients in particular? So it does require a lot of staff time, especially, I've been involved in a lot of coalitions that were like monthly meetings. If you're in multiple collaborations, that's like a meeting a week, maybe multiple meetings a week. That can really suck staff time. Sometimes it can be really difficult to get everyone on board. So when if you have 20 different nonprofits involved, everyone's going to come in with their own idea. Ultimately, everyone's going to try to advocate for the mission of their organization. So how do you get everyone to have a shared interest? That can be extremely difficult because people are going to be advocating for different things, and everyone's going to try to want to contribute something differently. So you need to make sure that you are really best utilizing the resources at play. So again, it's key. The main con is that you have a lot of people with different ideas, and trying to get them together on board for one common mission, ultimately when they don't need to be there. It's not a requirement of their nonprofit for them to sit on this coalition, so why should they? That's how some people feel, especially if it's really taking time away from their nonprofit. So it can be really challenging to get everyone on board when you have so many different ideas, and it really takes one really good negotiator to get everyone around a common interest. I was involved in the coalition of for organizations that serve children of ex-offenders. And we didn't have one person who was really in charge. It was just a random group of people. We all had different ideas. We were trying to plan this advocacy day, this day to provide awareness about ex-offenders, and it ended up being a disaster because we were trying to plan this picnic and who was supposed to bring what. We didn't know who was actually bringing hot dogs, and that's, we were trying to plan a barbecue, and without knowing who was bringing the hot dogs, we didn't have much of a barbecue. So I think we had like $25 in barbecue, which doesn't get you very far. So that ended up being really difficult without having a solid leader and without having really a way to keep people accountable. It's hard to keep people accountable as part of a collaboration when ultimately they're not a staff of that area. So how do you hold people accountable that they're going to come to the meetings, to attend the events, to provide the hot dogs? If they say they're going to provide the hot dogs, it can become really challenging. So that's why it takes a really good shared mission in order for collaborations to be successful. You also, when you're thinking about environmental forces, you also need to think about trends. So there's certainly going to be changes in public policy over time. There's obviously been changes in foster care reform. So the government has kind of shifted in different directions over the past 20 years. Are we trying to increase reunification with parents for kids in foster care? Is our focus more on permanency? So trying to get kids adopted. That's kind of a constant struggle within public policy. Is our focus on adoption, or is our focus on reunification with parents? And that's certainly going to shift how your nonprofit provide services. If you're providing services to kids in foster care, which way are you going to be moving? Are you working more with parents? Are you not working with parents? So that's changed a lot in the past 20 years and is constantly evolving. We've seen a lot of changes with welfare reform. Are people going to have access to a very specific type of welfare? What are they going to have to do to get unemployment benefits, to get TANF? There's very recently been shifts in, now there's more employment requirements to get welfare. That's going to be add another layer of challenges if you're an organization that's working with low-income people who might not be able to meet those welfare employment requirements. Obviously, major changes in immigration. So if you work with an immigrant society, helping them on getting legal status to be here, helping, you might have increased anxiety over people who are worried about being deported or their family members being deported. So those public policies are really going to affect your nonprofit. There's, of course, funding instability. We don't know what the government's going to fund or not fund. We have rising national debt. So at some point, the government's going to have to cut back. Some of that might come in social security. So as we have an aging population, there's going to be less and less money available in social security. So your older adults might not have as much to live off of during retirement than they thought. So they might need to work longer. When we think about technology, so think about how technology can be used to your advantage. So think about fundraising. So a lot of nonprofits are kind of shifting to doing more fundraising online. Research has shown that more millennials are donating online. So rather than sending out bulk mailing through the postal system, maybe we can send out a bulk email, and that can kind of have the same result. So we're going to have to adapt our fundraising to technology. Additionally, we can use technology to connect with clients. Text messaging is a new way of connecting with clients that might be a little easier than just having to make a bunch of phone calls. There's different treatment opportunities using new technology. Again, there's a lot of apps that we might be able to use, not just for substance use, but tracking depression and anxiety. We can certainly use technology to the advantage. And of course, there's just been a growing environmental trend towards nonprofits really measuring their impact. What effect are they having on the broader social problem that they're trying to enhance? So rather than just looking at, nonprofits using their funds in an efficient way, funders want to see the nonprofits are having an impact. They want to see the change in their clients or change in the general population, and the problem that they're trying to solve. And they want to see that before they choose to fund it. So it's something that nonprofits are definitely going to have to be aware of. So keeping all of this in mind, our activity for this week, first, we do not have a lecture quiz for this week. Giving you the week off of lecture quiz since we have a big paper due. All of these are going to be due on the 19th at 11:59 p.m. So I want you to do a Prestel analysis. So keeping all of those PESTLE sections in mind, consider a nonprofit that you've had some past experience with, whether that be as a volunteer or a worker or an intern. Complete a Prestel analysis. So I have a template on Blackboard. So just identify 2 external factors per category that's going to face this nonprofit in particular. So choose a specific nonprofit and apply these Prestel factors to this specific nonprofit. So 2 factors per letter. So 2 political factors, 2 environmental factors, 2 economic factors, etc., that this nonprofit needs to be aware of. Use the template on Blackboard. So this shouldn't be too time consuming. Because what do we also have due? On the 19th, we have our community assessment paper due. I've been talking about this a lot. I'm not going to go into more in-depth explanation today. If you would like a more in-depth explanation, I would highly suggest that you watch those past lectures. What I have also posted that will be helpful is along with the outline of what all you need to be doing, I posted an example outline that will give you an idea of what I'm looking for. I will also be posting a video that kind of walks through that outline, the example outline. So I'm going to provide in video an example of what I'm looking for in the community assessment paper. I have already posted a video detailing the outline. That's been included in past lectures, so watch the past lectures for specifically what I'm looking for. The video that I'll be posting is simply an example, so that will just kind of provide some more information. Later, the last thing we have due, major project we have due for the semester on May 10th, so this is the last day of, essentially the last day of the semester, is your nonprofit assessment presentation. I'll talk more about that next week. I'm trying to get through one thing at a time. So your community assessment paper is due at the end of this week, week 12, on April 19th. 10 to 12 pages. Look at the outline online. Okay, I think that is all that I have. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your week. Hopefully you've had some nice weather.